Hi, thanks for tuning in to another garden benchtop tutorial. If you've clicked into this tutorial, I bet you're looking for the best soil mix for your Monsteras. But I've got some news for you that some Monstera fanatics will probably disagree with. There is no one best Monstera soil mix. But don't click away because I'll explain why. Despite what you see on many of the plant forums, Monsteras are very hardy plants. They can actually survive in quite varying conditions and varying soil types. I've seen perfectly happy Monsteras thriving in 100% out of the packet commercial soil mix that you can buy down at your local nursery. And at the same time, I've also seen Monsteras thriving in a custom-made chunky aroid soil mix that has 10 ingredients inside. And the reason why I'm saying that there is no one golden Monstera soil mix, because ultimately it comes down to your plant parenting style. And let me explain. Because this is one of the important principles that we like to teach at the Garden Benchtop community. Your plant parenting style will influence a lot of the choices that you make. If you're a plant parent that is time poor, has a busy social schedule, and is rarely at home, you're going to need a Monstera soil mixture that has materials that can hold and retain water, so that you can be a bit more hands-off on your Monstera care. Whereas if you're someone who, say for example, works from home or is home a lot, and loves to dote on their indoor plant collection, then you're going to pick up on signals that your plants are sending you. For example, droopy leaves, or you'll be able to test if the soil is dry more frequently than someone who is time poor. So I'm hoping you're starting to see why you can't just rely on one recipe. You're probably going to need to experiment with the ingredient ratios to find that perfect balance that will suit your plant parenting lifestyle. And the good news is, I'm going to show you how to mix it up so that you can find the best Monstera soil recipe for you. Okay, so irrespective of the Monstera soil that you use at the end of the day, there are some key properties that your soil must possess to keep your Monstera happy. And I'm going to quickly run through those properties so that you can keep this in mind and understand why I use these certain ingredients. Firstly, your Monstera soil needs to have excellent drainage. Being a tropical plant, Monsteras don't like a heavy condensed soil. They like a light and airy soil that allows excess water to drain away, preventing the soil from becoming soggy and potentially developing root rot or attracting pests. At the same time, your soil needs to have some water retention properties, because ultimately your Monstera root system still needs water. So your soil still needs to be able to retain water as a water supply for your Monstera. Another key property that your Monstera soil needs is airflow. Believe it or not, roots need access to oxygen, which means your soil needs to have aeration throughout, which is why I like to have a chunky mix, and you'll see why later on in this video. Now in terms of the metrics of your soil, Monsteras can actually tolerate a range of pH levels in your soil. If you stick to a neutral pH, you can't go wrong. But for our Monsteras, we like to have our soil slightly acidic, and that's because it increases the Monstera's nutrient uptake levels and ultimately gets them thriving. And lastly, you need some nutrients in your soil to feed your Monstera. You can of course fertilize your Monstera later, but we like to add it in right from the beginning so that it's evenly distributed in the soil. To keep things consistent and easy, I always use a part system when making up my own soil. It just allows you to create different size batches and having the results consistent. So all you need to do is get a container. A full container will form one part, and that helps you measure out exactly what you need for your batch of soil. So to begin, I've got 2 parts regular potting mix, and this is a premium potting mix that I picked up at my local nursery. I always love to start off with a regular potting mix because it adds such a variety of textures in the soil, and plus they usually add in slow release fertilizers, like you can see here, that provide a variety of nutrients for your Monstera. So that's 2 parts regular potting mix. The next ingredient I like to include is 1 part orchid bark. Now this one is what they call an orchid bark soil. So they've already mixed in some light soil in here, but feel free to use straight orchid bark. Now what I love about bark is that it makes the soil chunky. And if you think about it, orchid bark actually emulates the natural environment for a Monstera. Because in the wild, Monsteras grow on the bark of trees. So the orchid bark actually provides a medium for the Monstera's roots to grip onto. The next ingredient I like to include is 1 part sphagnum moss. Now this is probably a bit too much. This is probably more like 1.5 to 2 parts sphagnum moss, but I'm not going to include all of this in my Monstera soil. Now the reason why I include sphagnum moss is because it has fantastic water retaining properties. I always like to pre-moisten my sphagnum moss because it makes it easier to work with. And if you've seen a couple of our other videos at the garden bench top, you'll know we love this stuff. Now the next ingredient is 1 park lecker balls, otherwise known as hydro clay pebbles. Now lecker balls is something that I like to include, as you don't usually see this in Monstera soil. Now if you haven't heard of lecker balls before, they're pieces of clay that have been heated to a point where they expand. So these guys are actually very light and they're full of air, which is one of the key properties we need in a Monstera soil. Pockets of air and airflow that allows oxygen to reach the Monstera's roots. Now you can also use things like perlite, vermiculite or pumice, but I like to use lecker balls because again it makes for a chunky Monstera soil. Now it's important to pre-clean lecker balls, and I've actually made a video on how to clean lecker balls, so I'll put a link in the description below, as well in the top left hand corner. And last but not least is worm castings. Now I've actually sourced these from our own worm farms, which is why you may see little white bugs crawling around in here, and maybe even the odd worm. I've done my best to get all the worms out, but they like to hide. Worm castings are fantastic because it's a natural organic fertilizer. Now if you've seen other videos at the Garden Benchtop YouTube channel, you'll know that I love worm castings and I'll use them wherever I can. Okay, so before we get into making up the Monstera soil, the ingredients that I have here will produce a Monstera soil which I would describe as having medium water retention properties. And that's because I like to stake my Monsteras on moss poles. And moss poles are a great water source for a Monstera. So my soil doesn't need to be super water retentive. That being said, if you want a more water absorbent soil, you can increase the amount of sphagnum moss in your soil or increase the amount of regular potting mix, because regular potting mix also absorbs and holds a lot of water as well. At the other end of the spectrum, if you prefer a lighter, chunkier mix, try increasing your orchid bark, or, as well as lecker balls, add some pumice or some perlite. Like I said at the start of the video, it's going to take a bit of time and experimentation on your part to find the perfect balance of ingredients and ratios to get your ultimate Monstera soil mix. Okay, let's get into mixing the soil. It's really easy. Find a container and mix it through until it's evenly distributed. Now, you can use a trowel or a spade to mix it through. It's a matter of just tossing it around. But if you're like us at the Garden Benchtop, you can just use your hands and get your hands dirty. Okay, so there you have it. A beautiful, light, airy soil that your Monstera will love. Now, I always encourage a bit of improvisation, if need be. If you think that this soil could use a bit more orchid bark to make it more chunky, or you need some more potting mix to give it just a bit more density and texture, feel free to add it in. I'm quite happy with this texture, so the next step is to pot it up in my Monstera. But I'll save that for another video. So make sure you like and subscribe to our channel, so that you'll be informed when we release new videos. Thanks for watching, and as I always say at the Garden Benchtop, go get your hands dirty.